Wyoming is best known for its majestic landscapes, national parks, and a culture steeped in the American West. Yet in the history of America, Wyoming's past is often overlooked. Overshadowed by its more famous neighbors, such as Colorado and Nevada, many events in the history of Wyoming are largely forgotten. In this video, we will explore 5 forgotten events in the history of Wyoming. Number 1. The Mormon Wars. Throughout the first half of the 1800s, there were tensions between the Mormons and other settlers. The Mormon Wars began in Missouri in the late 1830s, but by the 1850s, tensions were rising in Utah. Although this conflict is often referred to as the Utah War, it did actually spill over into what is now Wyoming. On October 5, 1857, in southwest Wyoming, a band of armed Mormon militia launched 3 attacks on U.S. Army supply wagons. The most infamous of these attacks occurred at a low spot in the sagebrush at what is now known as Simpson's Hollow, named after the wagon master Lew Simpson. Having faced persecution before, the Mormons in Utah were wary when President James Buchanan sent a large military force to the Utah Territory. The Mormons had arrived in the Salt Lake Valley in around 1847, and the Mormon leader, Brigham Young, was also the territorial governor for Utah and chief federal officer of Indian Affairs. Growing friction between the Mormons and the federal judges caused Buchanan to appoint Alfred Cumming as the new governor of Utah and instructed the U.S. Army to ensure he was able to take his new position without interference from the Mormons. As the U.S. Army advanced through southwest Wyoming, the Mormon militia, known as the Nauvoo Legion, captured and burned the U.S. Army wagons and caused the Army mules to stampede. Although the authorities asserted that they would not suffer through the loss of the wagons, this proved to be false. The Federal Army spent the winter near Fort Bridger in Wyoming, which had also been attacked and burned by the Mormons. The lack of supplies and provisions led to a very miserable winter for the soldiers, and the issue was settled peacefully the following spring. Number 2. Pioneering women's rights. The first white American to enter Wyoming was John Coulter in 1807, but it wasn't long before the state was ahead of the rest of the country when it came to women's suffrage. Wyoming granted women the vote in 1869 and would become the first state in which women could vote when Wyoming joined the United States as the 44th state in 1890. The Women's Suffrage Act was passed without any debate or controversy, with men stating it was right and just to give women the vote, as well as it being a good advertisement for the territory. As women were scarce out west, some historians believe that they hoped to make the area more attractive for women settlers. After the bill had passed, a local newspaper wrote, "We now expect at once quite an immigration of ladies to Wyoming," which would help the territory reach a population of 60,000, enabling it to apply for statehood. The first female vote was cast by Louisa Ann Swain of Laramie at the general election held on September 6, 1870. The territory soon saw the numbers needed to apply for statehood. Still, when Congress demanded that Wyoming renounce women's suffrage in order to join the U.S., Wyoming stated that it would prefer to remain out of the Union for 100 years than to stop women from voting. Eventually, Congress conceded, and Wyoming was allowed to join the Union and keep voting rights for women. The fact that Wyoming was the first to grant women the vote wasn't the only feminist triumph in the state. The first female juror in the U.S. was Wyoming resident Eliza Stewart Boyd, whose name was drawn from the voters' roll to serve on the grand jury in 1870. This event was further evidence of Wyoming's progressive attitude toward women's rights and a groundbreaking step forward in early feminist achievement. Wyoming also pipped Texas to the post when appointing a female governor in 1925. 16 days before Miriam Amanda Ferguson was appointed governor of Texas, Wyoming elected Nellie Taylor Ross into office. Ross succeeded her husband as governor of Wyoming after William Bradford Ross died prior to the election. Although she narrowly lost out on being re-elected the following year, she remained in politics and was appointed vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Ross achieved another first when Franklin D. Roosevelt named her the director of the U.S. Mint, meaning she was one of the first women to hold a federal post of that importance. She remained in the position for 20 years and oversaw the minting of the Roosevelt dime, the Jefferson nickel, and the steel penny that was created as an emergency measure in World War II. Number 3. The Boseman Trail. The Boseman Trail was made popular by an ex-prospector called John Boseman. As a young man, Boseman's father had died while en route to California during the gold rush, and as an adult, Boseman also caught gold fever, leaving his family in 1860 and heading to Colorado. After several attempts to strike it rich, Boseman decided he could make a better living off the miners than mining himself, and realized he could make more money charging prospectors for his service as a guide. Boseman joined forces with a mountain man named John Jacobs, with Boseman acting as a promoter and Jacobs doing the actual guiding since he knew the land, trails, and waterholes. At the time, prospectors were headed to the Montana goldfields, so Boseman and Jacobs decided to search for a shortcut to Montana from the Oregon Trail in modern-day Wyoming. Soon, they set out to explore a corridor that had been used by Native Americans for centuries. Although it was also known to white explorers, traders, and trappers, it was not widely used by white Americans. The corridor was 500 miles long, but cut the journey by around 6 weeks as it avoided both mountains and deserts. It was also naturally well supplied with grass and water for pack and draft animals, and plenty of opportunities to hunt for game and collect firewood along the route. Boseman's proposed route left the Oregon Trail at Deer Creek and crossed modern-day Glen Rock after turning north through the Powder Hill Basin. The route then headed west toward the headwaters of the Tongue River, continuing northeast, entering the Yellowstone Valley and progressing through southern Montana to the goldfields. However, the route crossed through territories that were under the control of the Lakota Sioux, as per the 1851 Treaty of Laramie, who were less than happy about wagon loads of migrants passing through their prime buffalo hunting grounds. When the first wagon train, consisting of 46 wagons, 89 men, 10 women, and several children, headed up the trail in July of 1863, after 150 miles, they were confronted by a party of Sioux and Northern Cheyenne warriors, who told them to turn back. The group tried to enlist a military escort, but as none was available, the majority of the party retreated to the main road. Boseman and 9 others continued on the new route, avoiding the Native Americans by traveling at night and sleeping during the day. A year later, a much larger group of 450 wagons and 1,500 people attempted to navigate the route. One of these trains, the 150-wagon-strong Townsend train, was confronted by a group of Northern Plains Native Americans made up of Sioux, Cheyenne, and Northern Arapaho warriors. The natives challenged the group in an incident that would become known as the Platte River Raids. This time, the migrants were armed and in a much larger force. They fought against the native warriors, and the tensions quickly escalated into violence. Due to the scale of the conflict, the Union, which were already under pressure due to the Civil War, sent in the cavalry, which reacted so severely that it sent shockwaves throughout the tribes of the Great Plains. Many historians now believe that the event was also a contributing factor to the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. Number 4. The country's first national forest. When Europeans first arrived in America, they found land and resources in abundance, especially timber, but by the late 1800s, logging had drastically changed the American landscape. In 1873, Dr. John Aston Warder, the U.S. Commissioner to the International Exhibition in Vienna, wrote, "This subject of forestry is now claiming and must receive greater attention than previously. The increasing scarcity of timber within the first century of the nation's history, and that in a country famous for the richness and value of its silva and the extent of its woodlands, is a subject that calls for the most serious consideration of the statesman, and perhaps also the interference and care of government." 2 years after this statement was written, the American Forestry Association was founded. In 1882, this association merged with the American Forestry Congress, and the new organization began pushing for national forest reserves. After nearly a decade of petitioning to get better protection and management of public lands, President Benjamin Harrison authorized the creation of the first forest reserve, then called the Yellowstone Park Timberland Reserve in 1891, located on the eastern and southern boundary of Yellowstone National Park. The Timberland Reserve was expanded and gradually divided into separate units. The largest of these areas was dubbed the Shoshone National Forest and was the first national forest in the U.S. Number 5. The ancient history of Yellowstone. Although Yellowstone National Park is promoted as a pristine and untouched wilderness, it has been inhabited by humans for at least 11,000 years. Archaeologists working in the area have uncovered evidence of humans living in Yellowstone when mammoths and mastodons still roamed America. Throughout the centuries, Native Americans lived and traded across the area that is now known as Yellowstone National Park. mining obsidian from Obsidian Cliff in order to make weapons and tools such as knives, projectile points for spears, atlatl darts, and from around 1500 years ago, arrowheads. The sharp stone also lent itself to other equipment, such as hide-scraping tools. In 2013, an archaeologist called Doug MacDonald discovered a distinct obsidian projectile point, known as a Clovis point, that was dated to around 11,000 years old and was most likely made by some of the first humans to travel through Yellowstone. These early hunters would have preyed on woolly mammoths, huge bison, and other giant creatures that are now long extinct. MacDonald believes the bands of Clovis people would have visited the high elevations of Yellowstone during the warmer months to gather plants, hunt, and collect obsidian while living in the plains of present-day Wyoming and Montana, where the winters were milder. Native Americans traveled and traded throughout Yellowstone until 1872, when it was made a federally protected national park. Inspired by the idea of preserving the seemingly untouched wilderness, the government pushed out Native Americans, dismissing or ignoring any evidence that the park was used or inhabited. Later policies were shaped by the idea that native hunters were an unnatural threat to Yellowstone's environment, and it has only been in the last 3 decades that the National Park Service has made substantial efforts to research the prehistory of humans in Yellowstone. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about Wyoming, check out our book, History of Wyoming, a captivating guide to historical events and facts that you should know about the cowboy state. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.